but they care about process improvement. And if we can position BPM as the vehicle to accelerate the rate of improvement, then we are on to something.
Welcome to Process Pioneers, the show that takes a deep dive into the minds of decision makers, key influencers, and process experts who are pioneering the world of everything process. Welcome to the next episode of Process Pioneers. My name is Daniel Rayner. I'm the host of Process Pioneers. If you've been following the podcast for some time now, you would know that we've got many episodes out at the moment. I think we're at about 140-ish episodes, which is very exciting. And those episodes cover a range of people from the industry, process practitioners that are putting business process management into practice day in and day out. And if you've been enjoying the series, then I'd love to encourage you to, or ask you to go and give us a rating and a review on any of the channels that you're listening to this on, whether it's on YouTube or on Spotify or on Apple. It would mean a lot to us if you could give us a rating and a review. It'll help boost the podcast out there to more people that are interested in learning more about BPM or how they can adopt process in their organization. In today's episode, I have the absolute privilege of sitting down with Phil Joebges. Now, Phil is the director at KOM Consulting, and I must say, you know, I know many people in the process industry, and I hear a lot of fantastic things about Phil from people that have worked with him or know him from afar. So I'm really excited for this conversation. Phil, thanks for joining me.
Thanks so much for having me. And that's a great introduction. It's immediately 5 stars from me.
That's fantastic. So how did you get into the world of BPM? I know that, you know, some guests that we've had on this show, a lot come from an engineering background. Some come from, you know, being formally qualified and trained, like they might go through a BPM course at QUT or one of the many courses out there. Tell us a little bit about your journey into process management and take us on a bit of a journey leading up to what you're doing today.
Yeah, sure. So I think the first time I really got in touch with this process thing was as part of my undergrad degree that I did back in Germany around 2010. And one of the lecturers talked about processes, and it was at that time heavily from an SAP point of view. Probably didn't resonate very much with me, other than it was plastered all over our lecture slide. And then continued to do a bit of work in Germany. At some point thought, hey, it would be a really good idea if I go and do a master's degree. And it would be even better if I do that in a different country. So I had a bit of a look around and stumbled over a couple of master's degrees here in Australia that really interested me, one of which was the Master in Business Process Management at QUT. So I went ahead and applied at a couple of different universities to a couple of different degrees. And QUT did come back to me and said, no, sure, if you want to join, then join, give it a go. And I had that option. I also had an option for, I think it was a master's in IT somewhere down in Melbourne. But I didn't really want to go much further into information technology itself. I was wanting to pull out of that a little bit and get more onto the business side. And frankly, QUT had a really good website that described the course, and they hyped it up really well. And so I just thought, this looks really interesting. It's something that's a little bit different. So I'll give it a go. Went and did the degree and loved it. And then obviously started consulting here in Brisbane right afterwards with one of the companies that really specializes in BPM. So I kind of went all in, going from knowing very little about processes and business process management to having a full degree in consulting in the space, and ended up doing for the next 5 years or so, and progressively kind of went from the initial steps of process modeling, process analysis and improvement towards the more systematic building business process management maturity and capability at organizations. And then went to Queensland government and worked with them for a while. And I think after just under a year, thought that there might be an opportunity for me to go and do my own thing. And that's what I then started to do. I've been running KOM Consulting for a while now, and glad to report it's going really well. But certainly process management and bringing that process-centric thinking to the projects that we work on, to our clients, is absolutely at the core of what we do.
That's fantastic. That's great. So when you did leave your course at QT, I love the way that you kind of just said they contacted you back and said, yeah, give it a go. I wish every master's degree was as easy to gain acceptance as that sounds like it is. But when you moved from doing your degree, which I would imagine would be somewhat theoretical, and moving into a consulting world where I'd imagine you would have been exposed to a wide range of organizations. What were the biggest, I guess, things that stood out to you about how organizations are practically putting BPM to practice? Because I think in theory it makes sense, but then you come into the real world and you start working alongside real organizations, and there are many things that I guess need to be considered for BPM to be a success. So what were some of those, I guess, light bulb moments, or maybe some of those frustrations that you kept coming up to where you were like, this isn't as simple or maybe as straightforward as what I learnt back in my degree, or maybe I'm completely off the mark there. But tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I've certainly been through a bit of a journey there. University is great in giving you the theoretical skills and the technical skills in doing the work, and whether doing the work means modeling per the perfect BPMN 2.0 standard, getting to know different tools, understanding process mining, understanding 10 different analysis techniques, knowing how Six Sigma is different to Lean, and so on and so forth. And then I believe we spent about 2 sessions, so about 3 or 4 hours in total, on what we call people and culture, and then really quickly kind of moved back to the technical skills. So then you start in consulting and start working on projects, start talking to organizations about process management, and you really quickly realize that actually should have probably spent 3 to 4 hours on the technical stuff and all of the other time on people and culture, because that is what it's about. It's all about the communication. It's all about connecting what we do back to the organization and being able to communicate it in a way that it resonates. Realistically, organizations don't care about process management. And I don't mean that in a hard way at all, but they care about process improvement. They care about delivering results to the organization. And if we can position BPM as the vehicle to accelerate the change, to accelerate the rate of improvement, then we are on to something. But that requires a lot of effort. It requires a lot of sitting down with people, whether they are SMEs or senior stakeholders, to understand where the organization is at and recognize where they are in the maturity curve as well. So that I'm not the guy that's coming in and saying, we should do our process architecture, all the first 3 levels, and appoint a whole ton of process owners. And meanwhile, the organization over here has got completely different problems going on. So yes, I do value my technical skills, absolutely. But I think it's certainly taken a few years for me to recognize that it's actually not that much about the techniques.
Yes, right. And when you're talking about those problems and solving those problems and the results that these organizations do want, what would you say are the biggest drivers for an organization to adopt BPM as a management approach?
I do believe it's really about the delivery of either projects or improving the delivery of the operational processes, whether that's products and services to end customers or other businesses. In the current economic environment, I've got no doubt that cost pressures and efficiency and supply chain resilience, these are all topics that are going to come up. And of course, process management can help with all of those problems and with all of those things. What I see very rarely, though, unfortunately, is the more opportunity-focused innovation side of process management. And if we take a critical look in the mirror, then I don't think as an industry, we've necessarily done a great job at positioning ourselves in that space over the last decade or so. So that's something that probably should happen moving forward. But yes, I would say that these days it really is about organizations that are looking to drive improvements across their operations, whether that's a standalone project, whether that's just building some capability in a business unit, doesn't really matter too much. But you can only get so far with pockets of excellence. And at some point, we need to have that broader VPN capability to make sure that we get the uplift in maturity and therefore better project delivery, more smoother processes, more effective, more efficient processes, better compliance, better safety rolled out across the organization, and we break out of the silos.
And why would you say that a lot of organizations don't spend much time in that innovation headspace? Because it has come up before in previous conversations, not many, but you would know Michael Roseman. When I had the pleasure of sitting down with Michael, that was he said something very similar, where a lot of organizations are spending too much time on the maybe continually improving, like incrementally improving little processes here and there, and not spending much time on innovating or creating the future. Because if that organization isn't creating the new future, there's someone else out there that's going to. So why do you think it's so hard or such a challenge for organizations to play in that space? Why do they revert to the the smaller incremental tweaking of the work that's been done?
I don't think that budget allocation processes are geared towards more innovative projects. So we can kind of look at it in two dimensions, right? So we can look at the day-to-day, what can every process analyst, what can every business analyst do on a day-to-day basis to move more into that innovation space, and then the organization as a system. Certainly the organization as a system is always going to value projects with a clear business case. And cost-cutting efficiency gains have a very clear business case. We know how we perform today. We know where our benchmark is, and the project is about closing that gap, right? So just kind of in very generic terms. That's a great business case, and every executive is going to sign up for that because they have a great success story to tell at the end of it. If we then think into the innovation space, and if we don't have a separate budget for innovation, then it starts to get very vague, right? And we're saying, oh, imagine if you could also do this. How good would it be if this process would also do that? Right? If we recognize the need for our product and our customers earlier, if we were to move to a digital delivery model and all of those things, and great ideas that are very difficult to put a business case around and to get really good metrics around. And so I believe that when you're trying to build a separate project around process innovation, it's always going to be very difficult unless you have a very senior sponsor. On the other hand, in terms of the day-to-day delivery in any project that's already underway, it's mostly about people telling you to stick to your scope and not necessarily having the risk appetite to think more ambitiously. And again, that's fair because the organization is not going to reward them for taking risks. The organization rewards, have you delivered the project as you said you were going to? I've had an example very, very recently where we've looked at a learning and development process that they were going to digitize, and as part of that, obviously looking at how they can improve it as well. And we had some really good ideas about truly using different technology to change the way the process runs, to make it a lot more efficient, to make it a lot better, remove a lot of the human intervention. But the risk appetite for it wasn't there. And that's okay. So what we have to do then is to make sure we record those ideas, right, and make sure they're at least sitting with someone. So if that changes in the future, they can go back to it.
Yeah, great. No, that's awesome. And looking at, I guess, those that the risk appetite was there, or you've been working with an organization where they're like, yes, let's innovate our processes. What are some of the, do you have a success story or two that you could share with us where an organization embarked on this BPM journey? Maybe they had already started and you came in and supported them on part of their journey. Do you have any sort of case studies or success stories that you can share where BPM did deliver significant value? Because I think that's one thing that the audience, the community listening to this will find beneficial or valuable is who's putting BPM into practice and what value is it tangibly delivering? What are we missing out on?
Yeah, absolutely. To me, business process management has a tangible and an intangible aspect to it. So there's the tangible aspects of process models, process architecture, and the tooling, the mining tools. Maybe posters up on the wall that talk about how we think about improvement ideas and all of that. And then there's the intangible aspect of success. So that is really just the culture of the organization, how people think, how people talk. And one of the clients that I've worked with certainly was really good in the tangible space of process management. So they had the tool, they had the process architecture. A lot of the process and business analysts were going to the tool to really cut down the time it took them for the as-is analysis in any project, whether that was dedicated process improvement, whether it was putting in a new technology solution. It was that was the first point to start, because why would you go and run workshops with the business if the answer is already sitting in a model that someone has done earlier, right? And so you really cut down that time. That's a really good success story. And they were just starting to then move into that intangible field as well. So where the business would then start and say, oh, we're doing this thing over here. I think that's got something to do with process. Can someone help me? So we're just starting to see that, and that was really good. I had a different client that had very few tangible artifacts, but was fantastic in the intangible space. So their whole operating model was expressed as a series of processes. They had aligned business performance measures with steps in this process. Whenever they thought about improvement initiatives, whenever they thought about buying equipment and buying hardware, it was about which of our processes is going to improve. No chance to see something like a process architecture, right? No one was doing it. Nobody had a role description on artifact that told them what a process owner is, but they were fantastic in this intangible space. And so the responsibility that I had in both cases was to just try and bridge that gap, because really we need both, right? We need people to be in the right headspace. We need the right culture, the right thinking, and then be able to back that up with the tangible artifacts. And at the same time, if we have a lot of tangible artifacts, but people don't really relate to it, it doesn't resonate with the organization, then we're also missing out on something. But I think those are really two good examples. And in terms of the tangible artifacts, absolutely faster project delivery and better project delivery, because we've got information that's there. And the rate of improvement, so people using BPM to really drive the improvement into the business, that's just great to see, because that's what we're there for at the end of the day.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'd imagine that when you engage with an organization, there are a few critical factors that you would want to understand, which will determine what they need to work on first, or maybe what key areas are they missing that need to be established in order to create sustainable BPM success. I think that's one thing that I've noticed when talking and working with different organizations is that there can be a lot of popularity around BPM for a time. And depending on the key individuals in the organization, if some move on, all of a sudden the BPM team can be shut down. The process center of excellence is no longer a thing. The process resources are moving on to other organizations. So how do we create sustainable BPM in our organizations? What are those key ingredients or those key factors that we need to at least consider?
Yeah, and I would love to have the silver bullet, but the reality is absolutely it's very difficult. And if we just critically reflect on process management, then talking about Australia only at this point, because I probably can't talk for other countries, but there really aren't that many great success stories that really have sustained investment into process management for, say, a decade or longer. But to me, it's about meeting the organization and meeting senior executives where they are. This is not about bringing something this thing called BPM, and then investing a lot of time and effort into trying to sell it. It's irrelevant. It adds noise. It doesn't help them with what's actually on their mind. So it's about recognizing what's already happening in the organization. There is a strategy. There are things that are happening in the organization, and how can we contribute to that by using process management? We connect to the existing portfolio of work. One of the things that everyone's been saying for the last 10 years is we're busy, right? We're busy. And so every year we tend to go through this cycle of starting up a whole bunch of work, and then about now really cutting budgets again, reprioritizing the portfolio, and so on and so forth. So if we come in with BPM and we come in the beginning of the financial year and say, we want a bunch of budget, we want to build a team, we want to bring the tool, we want to develop standards and conventions and train people, then we probably have about 5 to 6 months of a really good run. And then someone's going to look at us and go, oh, what are you guys doing over there? And do I really need you? So I think that's kind of the previous point of tangible and intangible aspects of process management. Certainly, I would heavily focus on the intangible aspects, because the tangible ones will naturally follow. And you build a very good case for tangible artifacts and tangible BPM output if you get the intangible aspect right. And that the intangible aspect only works if you reach out to senior executives and help them with what's on their mind. And whether that is the problem space or more the question of how can we generate better ideas for improving our business, right? What are the really exciting things and markets out there that we want to get into? It's doing things that matter to the organization, not coming in, promising BPM, doing something in a silo. The classic things that we tell our clients all the time, right? Oh, you guys working in silos. I can come in and help you with that. And the next thing we do is we build our own silo. So that's where we expose ourselves to a lot of risk, I believe, and restructures and political impacts on BPM are real, and they are severe and serious. So unless we're working in an organization that have a dedicated business process officer, we need to understand what the values that we can deliver and that we can bring. And that needs to be embedded in the people and in the culture. Otherwise, the next time that there's a budget cut, we're gone. Absolutely.
Yeah. So how do you embed it in the people and in the culture? I mean, you've touched on obviously bringing the senior leaders along for the journey, getting buy-in or sponsorship from that senior level. But as you've also mentioned, process touches all areas of an organisation, involves everyone. So who are those other stakeholders we need to be aware of, and how do we bring people along the journey so that if anything, we can leverage the information that's already sitting in their minds, as opposed to, I guess, creating enemies and hurdles and roadblocks and things like that?
I think a lot of people, or not a lot, but certainly quite a few I've mentioned to you before, don't say BPM or don't say process. And I'm one of the guys that's also going to fall into that camp, because it never is about process or trying to sell BPM. It certainly is about demonstrating the value that we can bring. And whether we need to talk to a lot of people. And when it comes to the question of sponsorship and dedicated budget, yes, absolutely. That's your executives, your project sponsors, and that level in the organization. On a day-to-day basis, in terms of embedding a different way of thinking, a different culture, I would actually think it is on the level of your subject matter experts, your team managers, maybe your executive managers. And that is about demonstrating what process-centric thinking is and what a process-centric approach means. not lecturing, not educating them. But if I work on a project that works on a technology replacement, then my requirements are done in a process-centric way, which means I've got a bit of a rough outline of a process and my business requirements link back to it. If someone talks to me about an organizational restructure, my starting point is, so what's the work that these guys are doing today and how's that going to change into the future, right? Which is just the process. If it is about prioritizing improvement ideas and managing a portfolio of work, then just doing an overlay of the current portfolio onto a view of processes without calling it an architecture, just a view of process and seeing how that resonates in the organization. So I'm a big fan of recognizing the reality that every process analyst, every business analyst, every subject matter expert in these organizations can start building the baseline for process management today in the work that they do. And it's just about the process-centric thinking, the process-centric approach. And if we do that for a while and we show that there is value, that it does make a difference in how we run our day-to-day processes or how we deliver projects, then we've got an in. And that's the right point in time when we should then go and talk to a senior executive, because we have a bit of a success story, right? And importantly, we can use those guys to then talk to their executives. When I come in as an external, there's really only so far I can get to in conversations with any senior executive. It's much more powerful if I go and I take a manager, a head of, or even someone that's just working on the ground in the team along with me, and I let them talk, because they know the organization, they have existing relationships, they've got a lot more credibility than I do. And if they can explain how some of the work we've been doing actually has already helped them, then it's a much easier conversation rather than starting with the executive, but you really haven't delivered anything yet. So it's all just promises. And next, you know, you're panicking because you've promised all of these great things and now you're on the road to deliver. So certainly starting small, right? And working with the guys on the ground that are actually the ones that will demonstrate BPM on a day-to-day basis. As an executive, you probably don't need to do too much of that. Yes, you set the tone for the organization, but on a day-to-day basis, it's those guys that really have to embrace process management.
And I guess it's these people as well that, as you mentioned, they're on the front line. They're the ones participating in the processes and maybe identifying the bottlenecks, the challenges, the problems. And you know, I'm sure there are many organizations out there where there are many great ideas locked up in the minds of the people that are participating in a process, but they've never been given a channel or an opportunity to bring ideas to the table and actually participate in change.
Absolutely. And also in terms of the benefits that we are creating through process management, if you create benefits at the front line, that's when you get scalability, right? Because you have hundreds or thousands of people, and if you can deliver benefits to them, then you're going to get real benefits that matter to the organization. If I promise a bunch of benefits to senior executives, then those benefits don't scale as well, right? But looking at BPM and process improvement through that lens, I believe, just sets us up for a lot more success as well. And that's when the things like having a good tool for your modeling, the training, the mindset, that is where you get that real momentum that's going to keep going. Because even if we then have a restructure, right, and politics happen and people get swapped in and out, the guys on the ground, they will still do their job. And hopefully we have built enough momentum that some of that at least perseveres through those changes.
Yeah, that's great. And now looking towards the future. So obviously we've got quite an audience that do listen to these episodes, and there are going to be people tuning into this that they're currently in an organization, and maybe you've piqued some interest in them, and you know they want to explore this topic further. They want to see how they can continue to maybe encourage or influence the organization to down this BPM management approach. What what does the future look like from what I guess you've been observing or the trends that you've been noticing? There's going to be quite a difference between those mature organizations that are kind of at the cutting edge and are diving into all of the latest technologies. And then there are going to be those organizations where, all of the information still in the minds of the stakeholders, nothing's managed well, nothing's governed, nothing's available. So there's quite a bit of diversity there. But when you look to over the next 2, 3, 5 years, what would you be encouraging organizations to be aware of?
I would like to think that getting started on that maturity curve would be really good for organizations to do that haven't done so yet. Certainly, if there's already a certain capability in organizations, then we can think about more of those innovative ideas around process improvement, right? We can think about things like process mining. How do we now link existing repositories into our projects? Think about robotic process automation and those things. Maybe we hook up our systems, right, with operational systems and do simulation on what if we change this, then that. But realistically, that's a very advanced space for process management to play in. We're probably going to fall over technology vendors as well. And a lot of people promise that they do that. So I would probably bring it back to what I said in the beginning. And what I would personally like to see BPM to do over the next couple of years is just get so much better at communicating, get so much better at embedding process-centric thinking and process-centric approaches into the reality of the organizations that we work with, and worrying less about what we consider best practices, worrying less about needing to do certain things like a completely signed off and validated process architecture or those things, but really bringing it back to how can we use BPM to improve the delivery of projects? How can we use BPM to help organizations execute their strategy, whatever that means, right? Whether that's focused on growth, whether it's focused on regulatory compliance, whether it's focused on cost cutting and restructures, that's all okay. But connecting back to the reality of organizations rather than somewhat running in parallel and trying to do our own thing because, hey, we really think this is cool and interesting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, that's great. That's really good. And I guess for those that are listening that they maybe they're in a position where they have been tasked to drive BPM adoption in their organization, where do they go to, I guess, equip themselves with the knowledge and the skills to be able to continue to drive this? I'm sure that we learn through many different means, whether that's through text or audio or visual or through mentorship or different things like that. But for someone out there that they are wanting to, I guess, better equip themselves so that they can better support their organization, where would you encourage them to go?
I certainly think that BP Trends, the business rules community, and those kinds of websites, they're really good places to go to because they tend to be more ambitious in the vision that they set out, right? And they tell us about what we should strive to. So I think it is important to keep that in the back of our minds. And similarly, formal training courses, whether that is Lean Six Sigma, something like that, or a full-on process management degree. I think on the formal qualification side, that is certainly valuable. But then nothing replaces the actual experience, the real experience. And so mentorship, like you mentioned, that is fantastic. Going onto LinkedIn, listening to these podcasts, going onto YouTube, there's so many resources that I think at this point, we run the risk of being overwhelmed rather than not being able to find enough. And very, very quickly bringing that back to your reality. So for me, if I'm working on a particular project or if I'm working in an operational process, always asking the question of, so what does this mean to me? Right? What am I going to do with this tomorrow morning or on Monday morning when I get back to work, and making that connection so that we don't get frustrated. Otherwise, we get frustrated because people talk about all of these cool things out there. They're doing all of these great things, right? And it's so detached from my reality that I actually don't even want to look at it anymore. Oh, BPM, no, that sucks. It's nothing I can do. But being very mindful of that gap, I suppose, right? And really looking at what's the next step for me. That's probably what I would do, right? Talking to people. I love to talk to people as well. If someone has a question, yeah, for sure, go ahead, reach out to me, let me know. But there's also great LinkedIn forums and groups to just put some questions in or put some ideas out in the world and see what people think.
Yeah, that's great. And I love what you said there at the beginning of our conversation about how it's all comes down to the results. It all comes down to what does the organization care about? What are the key strategic objectives? Like all of these things are. The work that we're doing as process practitioners should ultimately support this, and that's. We should be gleaning and learning from those that are in other industries, in other organizations that are further along the journey from us. And then we can also look at internally at our own organization to be like, well, what are the biggest pain points, the biggest challenges, the biggest burning platforms, whatever you want to call it. And that's a good place to start. But Phil, I just want to thank you for sitting down with me and having this conversation today. As you said, you mentioned you're happy for any of the audience to reach out and connect with you. So for those that are listening to this, if you have gleaned something from this and you do have further questions that you want to connect and follow up with Phil, by all means, connect with him on LinkedIn and send your questions his way. But Phil, I just want to thank you again. It's been an absolute pleasure. I've gleaned a lot from this conversation. So thanks for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great.